Hi guys, it's me, Finn McCool. This is another animation video, but this time it's about the history of the space race. I made this for school a while back, and I think you guys will really like it. By the way, this is for you, Marshmallow526. Anyways, enjoy!
Space. People. Watermelon. Humans have always looked up to the stars and wondered why. Some people thought that the stars could predict the future. The Romans named their planets after their gods. People made constellations in the stars. We made calendars according to the phases of the moon. But then people started to wonder what would happen if we actually went up there. Sometime after World War II, the Cold War broke out, which was a fight between the Soviet Union and the United States. And from the Cold War came the Cuban Missile Crisis, a time when Americans were really scared that the Soviets were going to bomb them. So the government was really pushing science and engineering in schools so that the US could fight back. And so, thus began the Space Race! When the US and the Soviets were fighting to have the best space technology. But they needed a bit of help, so both the US and the Soviets captured German rocket scientists to help them. And with the help from those German scientists, the Soviets created Sputnik 1, which was the first satellite to ever go into orbit. But that got the US all scared, so in 1958, the US launched Explorer 1, which was the first US satellite to get into Earth's orbit. And then they started to think about sending people into space, but they couldn't just start sending people up there. They were gonna need to do some tests, and they were gonna do those tests with animals. And it was really important that they do those tests too, because then they would figure out what they needed to do to send people into space and have many more space advancements in the future. We sent monkeys and cats into space, but the most memorable of these animals was Laika the space dog, who has a bit of a sad story. During the space race, the Soviets were trying to think of what they would do next for space, and then they had an idea.
How about we get a dog from the streets and train him for space, then shoot him up in a rocket and do tests to see how he would react to space climate?
And then we bring dog back, right? Right? Sadly, they had no intention of bringing her back, so on November 1st, 1957, Laika went up into space on Sputnik 2, but just a few hours in, she died. The story of Laika the dog is sad, but she paved the way for many more space explorations in the future. After that, there was a lot of back and forth between the US and the Soviets, with the Soviets always seeming to be 3 steps ahead. Luna 3 took the first photos of the far side of the moon. Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space. Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman in space. The first spacewalk was done by Alexei Leonov. All of that was done by the Soviets. And after a while, the US started to get tired of this. So on May 25th, 1961, John F. Kennedy gave his famous speech saying that the US would be setting their sights on the moon. We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. So in 1961, NASA started the Apollo program, which had a sole mission of putting a man on the moon. They ran many tests, and most of them failed, but 8 years later, they finally had one that looked really promising, Apollo 11. Apollo 11 had a team of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. And that crew went up in a Saturn V rocket on July 16th, 1969, and over 1 million spectators came to watch.
We've been cleared for takeoff.
The trip to the moon and back would be about a 4-day trip. So on July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And then Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon's surface, becoming the first man to walk on it. And then he said those famous words we all know.
That's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind.
The US had done it! They had won the race to the moon, which seemed like the ultimate goal of the space race. Everyone back on the US celebrated, while the Soviets weren't feeling too good. So, the US unofficially won the space race by being the first to put a man on the moon, but the end of the space race would come a whole 6 years later, with the Apollo-Soyuz mission, which was a docking together of both a US and a Soviet spacecraft, and a handshake between the two captains signified the end of the space race. Even after the Apollo program was over and people lost interest in the moon, they started looking towards other planets. Like how the Viking 2 spotted ice on the surface of Mars. And like how the US sent out both Voyagers 1 and 2 to explore the solar system. And those Voyagers took the first pictures of Saturn and Jupiter. The US was also the first to cross race barrier, sending the first African American into space, Guy Blofeld. 1983 was also an exciting year for the US because Voyager 2 was sending back the first pictures of Uranus. The list of stuff that the space race impacted is honestly too long to list, so I'll just give you one or two. Like how the space race influenced the creation of the smartphone, solar panels, and it even helps make processed food more safe. You know those satellites from earlier? Well, a newer version of those satellites now helps millions of people connect over the internet. The space race also helped us get a better understanding of astronomy, meteorology, physics, and earth science. And some of the technology NASA made was also used to help the medical industry, public safety, and consumer products. NASA even helped with non-related space stuff like water filtration systems, food packaging, and those little tiny cameras on your cell phone. In fact, the inventor of digital photography, Eugene Lally, worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The US and the Soviets also banded together to make the International Space Station, where they both worked together. Though they weren't enemies anymore, they still tried to sabotage each other in minor ways, because they both wanted to be the first to make new space advancements. And it's not just the US and Russia doing all the space stuff either. Other countries have joined in the excitement, like China, Japan, Brazil, and India. There's even a rumor about Russia and China making space-based weapons, which would be a real problem for us down here. We even achieved our goal of reaching out towards other planets by sending rovers to Mars. And at some point, Voyager 1 started to exit the solar system, so NASA gave it the instructions to turn back and take one last picture of Earth. And this is the photo that was taken. After, Carl Sagan gave a speech about the photo, and this is what he said. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their years. The aggregate of joy and suffering in thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mount of dust suspended in a sunbeam.